Donald Trump's approach here around the nuclear question with Iran has been very hostile, to say the least. Professor Marandi brought up the U.S. intelligence threat assessment. It says quite clearly, we continue to assess Iran as not building a nuclear weapon, direct quote. But yet he began with sending a threatening letter, bombers to Diego Garcia. And according to the New York Times, the U.S. position appears to be that they want to not only dismantle a vast nuclear fuel enrichment infrastructure of Iran, the country's missile program as well, and Iran's longtime support for the axis of resistance. These are very maximalist positions. What do you make of this direction?
There's not a chance in the world that Iran is going to give up its allies in the region. Not a chance in the world. And there's not a chance in the world that it's going to give up its conventional capabilities, because Iran knows what will happen subsequently. The United States is ruthless, and the Israeli regime is totally barbaric. So those are off the table. The nuclear program, as long as Iran's sovereignty is preserved, negotiations can take place. We've done them many times before. But excessive demands will not be accepted, especially because Iran feels that the world has changed.
Well, before I start, I just want to say it's been a pleasure knowing you, Professor Marandi, and I'm sorry that your government's going to arrest you shortly after this program and bring you to the justice you so richly deserve. But I just want to. I'm saying that.
I'm sure Pierce would be very happy to see that happen.
You know, I just want to remind the viewers real quick. When was the last time the Iranian security services kicked down your door, Professor Marandi, and seized your computers and stole your papers? Never.
I know. Yeah.
When was the last time the FBI kicked down my door and stole my computers and stole my papers? Past August. So when we're talking about countries that oppress people for speaking out, Iran's not the problem. The United States is the problem. So let's keep that straight. Look, my background is not of diplomacy. I've been a diplomat. I've done diplomatic things. My background is as a United States Marine, and that includes my experience as weapons inspectors. Marines are very direct. We're very blunt, and we can become brutally blunt. And so in the process of this, of these negotiations or these interactions, I'll say, I've been very blunt, and sometimes my bluntness might be misinterpreted. But there is no daylight between Dr. Marandi and I when it comes to the facts of the situation. No daylight whatsoever. I wrote a book about Donald Trump pulling out of the JCPOA. You know what the title was? Deal breaker. Right? He's a deal breaker. He's not a deal maker. He's a deal breaker. We know this. We know this. It's not anything. So where does the problem arise? The problem arises, again, it's not an Iranian problem. It's an American problem. Do you remember when I talked about the JCPOA? I said the problem with the JCPOA wasn't because of what Iran did. It's how America behaved, how Barack Obama boxed himself into a corner with his irresponsible rhetoric threatening war, and finally be confronted with the fact that he had reached that threshold where either we go to war or we make a compromise. Okay, at that time, the United States was not prepared to go to war with Iran. We didn't have the capacity to do so. We were knee deep in conflicts in the Middle East. We were trying to get ourselves disentangled in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the last thing we were going to do is get involved in a major war with Iran. And one of the reasons is that the war was being couched at that time in purely conventional terms. Iran's program had not gone underground. Iran's program had not developed to the extent that it was a breakout or threshold capability. So from a military planning perspective, the belief was that we could interdict Iran's programs using conventional weapons alone, precision guided strike, etc. And then the realization came that, yeah, we probably weren't going to achieve that objective. And now once we initiate something, we would have to follow through with follow-on military action, which would require hundreds of thousands of troops in a proposition where victory was not guaranteed. And we just weren't going to go to war against Iran. So we opted the negotiation path. I would say that Trump has boxed himself into a similar corner. What is the one thing that's in common between Obama's position, Biden's position, and Trump's position? Is that the Israeli government has been pressuring the United States to launch military attacks against Iran for some time now. The other thing that connects everybody through this time is that the policy of the United States has never been singularly focused on Iran's nuclear program, but on regime change. And the sanctions program that we have been enforcing against Iran is a regime change program. It's the same mentality, the same prospects. I've been studying OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control. I've been studying their interaction with the Department of Treasury, with CIA, the State Department, on how they impose sanctions on Iraq. Iraq's sanction program was a regime change sanction program. Okay, Syria, a regime change sanction program. Libya, a regime change sanctions program. This is what we do. And we've been imposing a regime change sanction program on Iran since 2002. Some would say even prior to that. We have never tolerated the Islamic Republic. We've always viewed the Islamic Republic as an affront. We were supporters of the Shah. So we obviously were upset when the Shah was overthrown. The seizure of the American embassy and that whole hostage debacle, which concluded with American troops dying, 8 of them dying, perishing in fire on Desert One. That anniversary is coming up, April 25th. This scarred.
Just for your viewers, because many of them won't know this, but the Iranians didn't kill them. The Americans, their helicopters crashed and hit each other in Iran, and 8 of them were killed.
Correct. No, Iran most certainly didn't kill anybody. It was our helicopter crashing into a C-130 tanker that killed 8 American crew members. But we blame Iran because we say we wouldn't have been there if the hostages hadn't been taken, et cetera. I'm not going to get into discussion about that. What I'm trying to do is say that there's the history of the bombing of the Marine barracks. All of this lends itself to a very negative attitude on the part of the United States. We've spoken, Danny, you and I, about Russophobia many times and how the administration and the media poisons the minds of the American people about Russia. There has been, I don't know what we would call it, Iranophobia, but there's been the equivalent since 1979. We don't give Iran any benefit of the doubt. We condemn them. It's a blanket condemnation across the board with little or no effort to learn the reality of Iran. I've been to Iran one time in 2006, shortly after Ahmadinejad came into his presidency. I was shocked by what I saw. And what I mean by shocked is I was expecting a police state. I was expecting repression. I was expecting to be arrested the moment I got off the airplane, even though I was invited to go to Iran by Mr. Zarif, who was the ambassador at that time to the United Nations. And what I saw was a nation full of wonderful people who celebrated life. I was there during one of the big Iranian festivals. Maybe you know the one. They put lights in the streets and they build these monuments, these gateways, and just a beautiful time when people you walk out and people are barbecuing and they're giving you. I mean, you walk in and you're just fed for free as you walk by the various restaurants and stuff. They give you rose flavored water. It was beautiful. And the discussions were lively and energetic. And I was in restaurants where I had Revolutionary Guard. I mix up with the Iraqis, Revolutionary Guard at the table, and professors would show up and they'd be having this free for all. And I'm expecting, handcuffs to come out and the billy clubs to come out. And they just sat there and they did it in front of me, a foreigner, having a very energetic discussion. I didn't see oppression. I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm saying I didn't see it. And I also realized that we had been lied about everything about Iran. I knew that the nuclear program was a lie, but how we treated the Iranian people, how we treated the Islamic Republic, how we treated Ahmadinejad himself, who, I'm not going to say is my favorite person in the world, but I'm just saying that the way we presented him here in the United States is different from the way he was actually existed in Iran. We don't need to get into I know that he's not the most popular person in Iran either. But my point is the Iranians can talk about this. So there is a freedom of expression in Iran that surpasses anything Pierce Morgan or the other Iranophobes could ever possibly imagine. So, I'm not going to sit here and say anything bad about Iran. It's just not going to happen. The problem isn't Iran's fault. The problem is America's fault, 100%. But that doesn't mean it isn't your problem too. This is the point I've been trying to make. You see, Obama had a conventional military problem thrust upon him. Trump, in his first term, confronted by the reality of what Iran had done legally, not illegally, legally, but 60% enrichment, going underground, etc., when they had to look at the potential for military action, conventional military power was insufficient to achieve anything. We couldn't even begin a conventional fight with Iran because the consequences would be immediate and devastating against us. Iran has ballistic missile capacity to reach out and touch American installations in the region. We have no defense against this. Iran has the ability to damage or destroy the energy production capacity of the Middle East, gas and oil. And there's nothing we can do. They can shut down the Strait of Hormuz on demand. Nothing we can do. We have no conventional military response to Iran. So what Trump did is task the American nuclear establishment through a nuclear posture review and then nuclear employment plans to develop a nuclear response to Iran. Now, me saying this doesn't mean I approve of it. I condemn it wholeheartedly. But it is a reality, and it's not theoretical. This is real. These nuclear weapons that were produced on the direction of Donald Trump have been produced, have been deployed, and are incorporated into a plan of military action against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. So this is when I talk about the threat of nuclear war. It's not that I'm threatening you. I hope you don't take what I'm saying as a threat, Dr. Marandi. I'm not threatening you or the Iranian people. I'm stating reality. The reality is Donald Trump's rhetoric has boxed him into a corner where we have created a problem for which there is only one solution, and that's the military solution, which has been configured exclusively to use nuclear weapons. This is insane. This is crazy. This is lunatic, but it's real. It's as real as the day is long. And so what I've been saying is that, okay, Dr. Marandi, you accurately said that Iran did what it did after 2019, after they gave the West a year. They did what they did for leverage. But that leverage worked too well. You see, now your leverage has allowed the Trump administration and others to see, in the past, when we talked about Iran's nuclear program, it was propaganda. When people said Iran is this far away from nuclear weapons, propaganda. Hell, excuse my language. Netanyahu's been saying Iran's been on the cusp of nuclear weapons since 1995. I mean, Iran's been 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon for 30 years, except today they are 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. That's the problem. We went from propaganda to reality. Your leverage has become so effective that this crazy, insane plan, which under normal circumstances, the Pentagon would say, Mr. President, we're not going to nuke Iran. It's disproportional. The military necessity is not there. It's a violation of the international law, etc. The Pentagon now says the only way we can attack Iran is with nuclear weapons. You were too successful. Your leverage worked too much. But in a way, and this is where we might have a difference of opinion, because I'm not going to be insulting to the Iranians at all, but I believe that your leadership recognizes the danger that exists. I believe your leadership understands that this insane man, this deal breaker, is in power today, and that he has an arsenal which he opts to use against Iran will be devastating to Iran. You may be able to land some punches that hurt, but I believe it would be fatal for Iran. I don't believe Iran can ride out an American nuclear attack because I've been a war planner and I understand the mentality of those who plan wars. And we don't go in lightly when we do nation-ending exercises. There's the mistake people make in talking about Iraq, talking about Afghanistan, talking about Yemen even. These are not, I mean, first of all, Iraq was a nation-ending exercise, and we succeeded in ending the nation of Iraq in terms of the government of Saddam Hussein. We succeeded in pushing the Taliban out, but these weren't nation-destroying exercises. These were government alteration exercises. Iran is a nation-ending event, meaning that if we go to war against Iran, it will be a nation-ending event. It will be so horrible. And I'm not justifying this. I condemn it. I don't want it to happen. I also recognize that the consequences of this will be horrific, not only for the Iranian people, but for the United States and the region. Because Iran, no war goes as it's planned. I don't think we can kill all of the Iranians in day one. And I think Iran will have a retaliation. And where are we? Nowhere. But the good news is, if there can be good news in any of this, is the supreme leader. And I'm going to say something again. I don't mean to be insulting, and please don't take it as an insult. But history has shown that when Iran has been confronted with nation-ending circumstances, that the supreme leader drank the poisoned chalice that was offered to him. And you know what I'm talking about, Professor Marandi, the end of the Iran-Iraq war, which ended in ways that Iran did not want. Iran had to accept things it did not want, but the leadership made a decision because it was the only decision that could be made to save the Iranian people. The leadership today, the supreme leader and those around him, have come out strongly against maximum pressure. Of course they have. And if they've come out strongly against the military threats, of course they have. But they know the only way out is negotiation. The question is, how do we get to the right negotiations? And that's the question. But I think what's happened here is both Iran and Trump have blinked. Trump has backed down. Danny, you said, the letter that was written to the supreme leader was an insulting letter. I apologize on behalf of the American people for that letter. Horrible letter. But it made demands about ballistic missiles and made demands about relationships and things. But Trump modified that statement before he sent Steve Witkoff off to Oman. He said, all I care about is the nuclear. All I care about is the nuclear, which means that Trump blinked. And now Iran, even though Iran is saying we're not going to do direct negotiations, we're going to do indirect, it doesn't matter. The point is, your foreign minister is going to be sitting down in the immediate vicinity of Steve Witkoff, and there's going to be an exchange of ideas. A negotiation is beginning that could lead to a resolution of the nuclear problem, and therefore giving Trump a way out of the problem he has created. This is a problem that Iran didn't create, a problem we created, but it's a danger to Iran. And thank goodness, because a lot of my criticism to Iran in the past weeks is the rejection of negotiations. And I kept saying there's only one way out of this. This lunatic, this madman, this deal breaker will use nuclear weapons. He's not bluffing. This is a real crisis. And the only way out is through negotiation. Now, how does Iran do this without looking weak, without being accused of bending the knee? I think we found the solution. Whether it was by design or by accident, Trump blinked, and then Iran said, okay, we're not opposed to negotiations, and now we're having negotiations. What happens in these negotiations, I can't predict. I don't think you can predict. Steve Witkoff, who I know you despise, but what I would say is this. Let's put Gaza aside, difficult to do given the enormity of the crimes being committed. He's the man that traveled to Moscow and broke the ice with Vladimir Putin, got through the impasse that prevented the United States and Russia from moving forward in their negotiations. He did that. Why? Because he is literally an extension of Donald Trump. And when he travels and speaks, he speaks as Donald Trump. And when he's in Oman right now, he is Donald Trump. And I think the Iranians understand this. Now, he said something interesting. I don't know what's going to happen from this, but he said, I'm prepared to travel to Iran. Now, we can be dismissive of it, but Professor Marandi, when was the last time the Biden administration said they're prepared to travel to Iran? They never said that. The Obama administration was not prepared to travel to Iran. Trump is saying, Witkoff, go to Iran if necessary. We want a deal. See, you won. You won. You use your leverage to get the United States to the negotiating table. It's very good, but it was a dangerous game. This is what I've been trying to point out. I exposed the danger, not because I'm threatening Iran, but I'm being real about this because as I've told people, I ask people to love the Iranians more than they hate America. Love the Iranians more than they hate America. And what I mean by that is you are right to criticize Trump, criticize this, criticize that, but don't be so critical of America that you miss the opportunity for a deal that can save Iran. It may be a bitter chalice of poison. It's going to be, because you're going to have to make some sort of compromises. So it will be bitter. But Iran survived drinking that cup of poison in 1989. They survived. They thrived. And Iran will survive and thrive going forward. Russia just gave Iran the best way out. They just ratified a strategic framework agreement, which is telling the Iranians, cut a deal with America, and we will work with you to open you up to the East, to complete that pivot that Iran's been trying to make since the early 2000s. I'm just saying that the only way out of this is through negotiation. That's it.
There are 3 or 4 things that I would like to say, although I'm not sure if I remember them all. They're not. With regards to the Iran-Iraq war, which Scott knows I was involved in that war. I fought as a volunteer for years. When the leader, Imam Khomeini, accepted Resolution 598, it was a bitter drink for him, not or a poisonous drink for him, not because Iran was on the verge of collapsing, but because Iran wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein for all of the crimes he had committed against the Iranian people. Remember, he was given chemical weapons by the West. He slaughtered. The war was unprovoked. The West supported him. Arab regimes supported him. The Eastern Bloc supported him, and it was a bitter 8 years. And Iran was moving to unseat the regime when the Americans came into the Persian Gulf and started fighting alongside Saddam Hussein, then downing an Iranian airliner. And so he accepted the Resolution 598, but he accepted because Resolution 598 did accept Iran's sovereignty. And if there was no Resolution 598, he would not have accepted a ceasefire, because then Saddam would have just continued the war. So we had a basis. The reason why Iran didn't initially accept Resolution 598, which was passed during the height of the war, like a year or so before the ceasefire, during the Karbala 5 operations, where I was shot in the arm. I was a military diver in that operation. That was the height of the war. It was very intense battles near Basra. And it was under that pressure that the UN Security Council passed Resolution 598, which met Iran's demands, except for one demand, and that was that determining the aggressor was put down like in, I don't know, Article 8, and Iran wanted it to be in Article 1 because Iran knew that the US and the West would never allow Saddam to be condemned. That was the issue. So we had an acceptable agreement. It wasn't ideal for Iran, but Iran's sovereignty was respected, and so we ended the war. We preserved our sovereignty. Saddam Hussein failed, and his failure was reflected in the fact that his country was bankrupt, and he went and invaded Kuwait. Of course, the U.S. ambassador, the story between Saddam and her, all that aside, but he went into Kuwait, and we had a new chapter in our region. So our ceasefire with Saddam Hussein was based on a resolution that preserved our sovereignty. And ultimately, Saddam was condemned, but that's a different story. The second issue is, Scott is right about Iranophobia, I guess. I don't know what it's called. One of the things that the Americans did and the Europeans was that they antagonized Iran for decades, and then their client regimes in the region They antagonized Iran through sectarianism and racism. They basically were telling their own people that we're not Muslim. That's where the whole Wahhabism and ISIS and Al Qaeda began to grow, and the extremist ideologies that we see in Afghanistan. And so this has nothing to Iran with Iran's policy. Iran has always been open about its support for the resistance, for Hamas, for Islamic Jihad, for Iran has been the most open about its views. But interestingly, the same people now they say, well, Mr. Erdogan, he's lying. He's doing a great job. He's pretending to the West that he's their ally. And he, in reality, is undermining the West and working for the Palestinian cause, which of course is nonsense. Most people are decent and most people want to live together in peace and prosperity. And it's these regimes like, Qatar has funded a lot of this, Saudi Arabia, sadly, Erdogan, others, the Americans. This divide and rule policy has been going on for 40 some decades. And so Iran is not only antagonized in the West, but it's antagonized in the region. But it's interesting how it has evolved over the last year and a half, because in reality, the only people who are supporting the Palestinians are the resistance. And it's Iran that is alongside Yemen and Hezbollah that they're paying a heavy price. Whereas Erdogan is selling his oil or transporting Aliyev's oil, the Emirates, they have good relations, the Egyptian regime, the Jordanian regime, and the list goes on. They all have excellent relations. So interestingly, the things have shifted a lot with regards to perceptions about Iran and Iranian intentions. Just one thing, Scott, and again, it's about tone, because what you said, which I think was and I didn't respond to this because I knew that's not what you meant, but what some people perceive to be critical of Iran or supportive of the United States. I think you said something like, hopefully Iran will put aside its dismantle parts of its program that the United States and Israel find to be like some sort of existential threat. And I think, and I'm sure you don't mean it in that way, because everything that you said today, I agree with about the history of the program, the nature of the program, the nature of the relationship. But that is, I think we all have to focus, as you've been doing tonight, on the fact that it's not Iran that's the existential threat. It's the United States. It's the Israeli regime, which you've been pointing out tonight. And I think maybe some people who were attacking you, and I never have attacked you online, and you're the only person probably that I've been on your show at 3 a.m. I don't do that. If you recall, once I came on your show, it was like 3 a.m. So
I remember that.
out of respect, out of respect for what you do, you invited me, I think, twice, and I think both were pretty late, if I'm not mistaken. But all I can say at the end, and because this is that Iran takes that into consideration, but Iran also is preparing itself for that situation. In other words, Iran has underground drone bases and missile bases across the country. And there are so many that I think they're probably in the hundreds. And they are prepared for that day that the Americans do carry out that. And the Americans would have to use hundreds of nuclear weapons to prevent Iran from taking out everything. And when Iran takes out everything, that means the global economy is gone. I don't want to see that. You don't want to see that. None of us want to see it. But this is sort of like, and it's not equal in power, but it is a sort of mutual assured destruction.